Passion in my pocket, so my pennies should be. What they selling is cheap, so I'm buying that this freedom is free. I've been becoming me. See when Jesus taking the lead, with purpose I bleed and rise like going under the heat. Defeat is a never. You can't reattach with a sever. What's bringing you pleasure can tell you where you stacking your treasure. When storm is your weather, know that it gets worse for it's better.
Welcome to the Esau Macaulay podcast. I'm your host, Esau Macaulay. And on today's episode, we have, according to the New York Times, famed cultural critic, Rebecca's son. Is that a fair way of describing you?
I would take out the famed for fact-checking purposes, but cultural critic, as if the Times says it, it's official.
So we're going to, because I am addicted. Don't judge me, internet, or Christian Twitter is overly sensitive. Don't judge me. I love Squid Game, and I say I want to talk to someone about Squid Game. And I read Rebecca's 2 different great articles about it. And so we're going to talk about that later. But we have this game that we play on our podcast, which is called Are You Washed? And the whole point of the game is to see if you have the cultural cachet to talk about the subject under discussion. And so I thought to myself, since we're doing a podcast about the show Squid Game, maybe I should ask Rebecca about squids.
I've prepared for the wrong quiz.
There we go. I try. You got to be aware. You got to be flexible. If you think I'm going to ask you a bunch of game facts, no. Okay, then. So the first question. Which country consumes the most squid? And I did this by imports and, who imports the most squid? Who's the most squid consuming country there is in the world?
Ooh, okay.
Who's addicted to squids?
Let me puzzle this out. Because if you're saying importing, because I was going to assume that a lot of squid comes out of Asia. So I was going to say like Japan or something like that. But what?
Well, apparently though, I didn't just say imports, but if you Google who eats the most squid, this country comes up consistently. So who eats the most squid?
I feel like it's an Asian country because our people eat a lot of squids.
It's actually not an Asian country.
It's not?
It's not.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Go ahead. Keep going. Try.
Okay.
Pick a country.
I feel like it's not American. Okay. You know what? I'm going to say there's a weird this sounds so xenophobic. There's a Nordic country that eats like that, like lutefisk.
You got to shoot your shot, Rebecca. You're trying to have guess. You got to go for it.
I know. All right. Let's just go. Let's go for it. I'm gonna say that the biggest consumer of squid is Sweden. I don't know. This feels wrong. It's not the biggest country of anything. I gotta go with
believe it or not, it's Spain. I did not know that they're putting down
Spanish
squid
cuisine.
left and right. Okay, second question. How many hearts? Mm-hmm. How many hearts does a squid have?
Esau, I was a big trivia nerd in high school, so I'm not able to playfully play this game.
Okay.
Okay.
You want to get it right. Okay.
I want to get it right. How many hearts does squid have? I feel like it's not one, but I did study biology. Oh, it's not 4. Why not?
There are 3 hearts in the squid,
close.
So they're not easily killed. Now, how long does a squid normally live? Probably longer than someone who's on the show Squid Game. But what's the average lifespan of a squid?
There are a lot of marine animals that have really long lifespans. And squids live some of them live in the deep ocean. I'm going to say it's pretty long. I'm going to say it's like 100 years.
Rebecca, you're 0 for 3. It's like 1 to 3 years. And I'm not going to lie to you, Rebecca. We might have to cancel the rest of the podcast. You got one more shot. This is the last one. And normally we would have, when people are struggling on our quiz game, we would have our producer, Mike, come on the show and help us out. But Mike isn't actually here today. There's a beef, there's a thing going on between me and him, and he apparently refused to come on the podcast. I can't explain it anymore. I don't know where Mike is, but sorry, Mike, you can't help her. Rebecca, last chance.
Okay.
Squids are often confused with what other sea animal or mammal or whatever. What are they often confused with? This is the easy one.
Oh no, I have two possible answers. My first answer.
Okay.
Oh no.
Go ahead. Go for it. Go ahead.
Okay. My first answer was going to be octopus because
you got it right. There we go.
Okay.
You didn't go 0 for 4. You didn't go 0 for 4.
All right.
Now I will give, in case you're out in the wild and you're trying to decide, is this a squid or is this an octopus? The way to decide is that, you're holding it up. A octopus has 10. Well, one of them has 10, one of them has 8. I don't have it written properly in my notes.
Octopus
That's
is
how
8
you can tell.
because octo.
Yes. Oh yeah, octopus. There we go. Octopus has 8 arms and a squid has 10. Now, all of that to be said, I never even asked this question. What does the title, why is it called the Squid Games? Does it have anything to actually do with squids? For those of you who don't know, I should probably put a little context. I don't know how you could not know about this. But a couple of years ago, because it wasn't just last year, I think there was a little bit of a gap in between them, that probably one of the most streamed and popular shows on Netflix was Squid Game, it's Korean drama, correct?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Then this is in season 2. And so season 2 just premiered I think a few weeks ago, and I've only made it through 3 episodes. And so it's called Squid Game. The whole premise of it is there are these people who have a variety of financial catastrophes that then leads them into this game where they kind of compete to the death in the hopes of winning a large prize. Is that an accurate at all description of Squid Game? Have I already gone off kilter?
No, that's very accurate. The premise is very simple, which is you play a bunch of like childhood type games in hopes of winning a big jackpot. But what the participants don't realize until they play the first round is that when you lose, you're killed.
Yes.
So that's the twist.
The plot twist is one of the first game that they play in season 1 is red light, green light, which is kind of the popular kids game. And instead of being out if you move during red light, you die. And so they quickly find out that things have kind of gone awry. Now, can you explain a little bit about why you think season 1 became the culture phenomenon that it was? Like, what was happening to make Squid Game this international hit?
Yeah, absolutely. So Squid Game, the first season came out in September 2021. So if you kind of remember globally, and like Esau, you said, it was a Korean drama, and Netflix puts out hundreds of titles a year. And so this wasn't something that, there was any marketing about for in the West. But in late 2021, you can remember that we were all sort of globally emerging from 2 major experiences, one being the pandemic, and which brought on a ton of side effects, that kind of made us realize a lot of things about inequality, socioeconomic inequality mostly, and other things. And then in the U.S., obviously, there was a quote unquote so-called reckoning over race, but so I think that globally there was an appetite for some sort of art that really made very blunt this plight that we were all in. And season 1 was very accessible, despite being a Korean drama, and in a foreign language, maybe people aren't familiar, have never seen anything out of Asia before. It's very easy to understand the premise, like we just explained. Everybody can understand sort of a battle royale type of, one, survivor, winner takes all type of thing. And the allegory was just so clear that the way that the show depicted its characters and the situations that they were in was sort of remarkably relatable. I think everybody has felt.
For those people, what is the allegory? You said the allegory is so clear. For the people who may not, the 5 people who didn't see Squid Game, what is the allegory that is at the heart of season 1?
Sure. It's essentially the system of capitalism that
Yes.
Sort of every country that has access to Netflix is,
Yes.
lives under capitalism. Are we set up to fail? Is there's this sort of idea of this crushing debt or this crushing financial pit that you're in, and the idea that like we can't all mutually benefit. For me to prevail, you've got to lose.
Yeah.
And what are you willing to stake your life on?
Yeah. So I think the thing that I found really, really interesting was there are a bunch of critiques of capitalism. That idea that when to critique capitalism isn't unique, but it was in such a compelling context. In other words, as I understood it, so you can forgive me, you're the cultural critic. I'm just a podcaster. What I realized is that this idea that in a lot of these cases, the people who ended up playing the game had one particular incident that led to their economic ruin. And so on one level, the people who are outside of the game or in the game of capitalism, they've lost. And if you lose, it's really, really hard to get yourself out of it. And so the stories that sometimes surround the people who enter the game is the idea that we don't always come out on top, even when we're doing the best that we can. Then once you get in the game itself functions also as a metaphor for capitalism. That there is someone who has more money and more resources who's controlling the game, and in some sense seeing the people struggle and fight for their own entertainment. And is that a fair way of looking at it? The idea that the game itself and the people who are competing within the game are stuck under the authority of almost these rich oligarchs who are pitting us against each other for their entertainment, and because they are benefiting from the game in a variety of ways, they're making money off of our struggle.
Yeah. That's right. It's revealed late in season 1 that the Squid Game was essentially invented by what the show calls a bunch of VIPs. These are the oligarchs. These are the global billionaires who have more money than they know what to do with. There's a great line of dialogue by one of them in the last episode of season 1 where he says, I think he said something like, not having enough money and having too much money are the two most unhappy states that you can be in. Which I thought was quite profound, and I'm paraphrasing it badly. But yes, the game within the game is sort of in itself a little microcosm of how capitalism sustains itself, the engine for it. Yeah.
One of my other jobs when I'm not doing a podcast is I am a professor of New Testament at Wheaton College. And one of the things that we talk about, we do a lot with the Roman Empire, and we deal a lot with, obviously, slavery in the Roman Empire. And one of the ways that I try to talk to my students about making sense of slavery in the first century is that without diminishing what slavery was, not kind of pushing those things aside, but I said it's very easy for us to sit in the first century and in the 21st century and wag our fingers at these people who were in the first century and say, why don't they do more to critique this completely corrupt system? And then I would say to my students, now, there's a lot of things that you can do in a lot of churches. But one thing that is probably hard to do in an American church and not get into trouble is to stand up and critique capitalism. The idea that this dog-eat-dog context in which there must be a winner and losers, and that sometimes in order to win, because there are really no ethics in capitalism, that you sometimes find yourself in this place where your values as a person of faith and what the market is telling you to do are in conflict. And so what I found interesting about this show was that it forced me, in the context of, and if people don't have a stomach for violence and they feel like that's not the best way to do a metaphor, then that's fine. I'm not gonna say that you need to watch the Squid Games. But the idea that it forced me to kind of confront in a way that I hadn't before the ethics of the economical system that has clear winners and losers that we justify by kind of pushing it to the side and chipping at the edge of it instead of critiquing the thing itself. Now, is that what you think the person wanted me to do? Did he want me to have a moral crisis around whether or not I should be getting out of the Squid Game?
I've had the privilege of interviewing the director Hwang Dong-hyuk.
You flew. I did this. Yeah. I did this. You're the first person on the podcast who's flown to a foreign country to interview a Oscar-winning director. Did he win? What did he win? Did he win the
Emmy winning. Yeah, Emmy winning.
Yeah, you're the first person in the history of the podcast to fly to Korea and interview an Emmy-winning director. So yeah, what did he say?
Well, so I've asked him. So his original inspiration for the show was simply because he was one of those people who found himself in that dire financial strait. His mom was widowed very early, so he was raised by a single mom, and there was a point in his career, I think, when he was in his 30s, where he was so poor that he literally fantasized and thought, if I had a chance to put my life on the line just to get my family out of this financial hole, I would take it. So he kind of wrote this scenario because he could relate to these participants. Is one thing that's interesting.
I've never thought about this before, but has anyone ever put Squid Game in the conversation of crime and punishment? Because it's not the exact same thing, but he commits a crime in order to fund his career, and he justifies it because, he needs this money to have this better life. It's not the exact same thing because it's an individual. So, spoiler alert for those of you who haven't read Crime and Punishment. There's a murder. Raskolnikov, he does it. He confesses at the end. Spoiler alert. But is anyone? So he didn't evoke any other kind of literary themes or tropes. It was more his own personal experience.
So the only cultural reference that Director Hong has evoked that I've heard that he said to me was actually The Matrix. Which was sort of, once your eyes have been opened to see how the infrastructure of how our society is running, are you willing to just take the money and just live your life complacently, or can you no longer make the same decisions that you were making before? This is the dilemma. This is the question posed to the protagonist who, spoiler alert, survives season 1 of Squid Game. He wins all the money. Can he just go and take the money and just live his life and never think about Squid Game again? Or does it force you to make some changes? I think that's the question Director Hwang wants to make. He's been asked, because to answer the question you asked earlier, Esau, is the point to critique capitalism? Is this an anti-capitalistic show? Because ironically, Squid Game, because it became such a success, has made an enormous amount of money for Netflix. It has made so much money for Netflix.
That was the follow-up question I was going to ask, but keep going.
So, there's been a lot of ancillary marketing. In essence, this show that critiques capitalism has served to fuel the engine of capitalism further. And so I've asked Director Hwang, are you upset by this? Are you, because he, and to my knowledge, and this is just some industry reporting, to my knowledge, he was not personally that enriched by the success of the show. Just if you want to know, because when he sold the show to, right. Yeah. The way the deal was set up, there was no expectation that it would perform well. And so there was no back end, which is the term for making money off of royalties or however Netflix is going to calculate the streams. So he just made a set amount of money when he sold the show. And then that was it. Right.
Yeah. So, I'm going to pause you. I want to pause you right there. So in other words, Squid Game became a manifestation of the reality of Squid Game, in which he was just doing something for the joy of, obviously he wanted to be remunerated, but for the joy of making art. He signs what for him is ends up being an unfair deal because of the success of the show. And so once again, the people who make tons of money made more money off of his labor. So one of the things that I always try to, because I get emails all of the time from my friends or texts from people, because I'm not necessarily a good negotiator, but I am someone who is very pro-artist and pro-creative. And there is this thing where we who create things, the writers, we often find ourselves, because creativity is what we do and the financial part isn't what we do, we often find ourselves in these potentially compromised positions. And when our best idea, the idea that we're just trying to first get out there with, becomes our biggest success, and now we're trying to capitalize on it, but our biggest success is the thing that kind of got us known. And so so he does do a better deal, I would assume, for season 2 of Squid Game. I'm assuming they paid him more.
Yeah, yes, that is where and he sort of like joked about it and said, like I finally had the budget that I wanted to execute my vision, and I'm sure now he had leverage. So certainly, even though nobody on either side has ever divulged any numbers, I'm sure he, as well as the actors, are being paid much more handsomely for season 2, and there will be a season 3 coming later.
I'm not Rebecca. I'm like 3. No, it's okay. I'm 3 episodes.
That's okay. I didn't spoil anything about the plot. Okay. I didn't spoil anything about the plot.
Yeah, we got to keep it there. Now, it is an interesting thing about art. Is like, what does it actually mean to be a artist who has a message? And clearly, Squid Game wants us to wrestle with the moral choices that we have to face in order to make it in a capitalistic world, a dog-eat-dog world. And so maybe I would ask you, as someone who is a famed New York Times cultural critic, can art be critical without being hypocritical when it's participating in the very system it often attempts to critique?
It's a great question. First of all, I should say that until I have published as much in the New York Times as you have, Esau, I cannot be considered famed anything. This is only my first, hopefully not last.
Hopefully first of many. Hopefully first of many.
Yes, hopefully. So that's a great question. Let me start by, if you don't mind, I'd like to just read the quote from Director Huang in one of my stories, because I think it really, I found it such a refreshing perspective, because this was asked and he said, I get this question a lot. Do you think Squid Game being created into a reality show and all this other IP overshadows the message? He said, but as content creators in a capitalist society, at the end of the day, everything we put out there is a product. The first objective for me is to create something entertaining for the viewers and commercially successful for me and for the investors. Squid Game was not something that was made with government money to educate the public. But having said that, so that's part one of his answer. But having said that, as a creator, I always want the product I create to carry value. I would love for it to give you food for thought, to help you ask questions. This series holds in it every emotion I think I've ever felt in terms of the way I view human beings and the world, all the elements of tragedy and comedy throughout life. It's all in there. So, sorry, that's his answer. I think about this a lot because I've always worked in secular organizations, and certainly in some circumstances, I have wondered, am I complicit to
everything your institution does?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I think that I don't think there's necessarily a one-size-fits-all solution for everyone, because God calls us to different parts of the mission field, right? To work inside and outside of the church and things like that. And so for me, this is just where I'm at currently, is I think that it is important for some people to work from within, the institutions or the structure, the apparatuses that they might find problematic, because that is where you have maybe an area of influence. And it may not necessarily be a massive impact that ripples outwards, but it can be, but it is something that you have to constantly check in on yourself, because there have been times where I'm like, oh, am I being too influenced rather than being an influence?
So one of the things that I think that is important for those of us who are listening, the people of faith who are listening, which I'm assuming is a significant portion of our listenership, is that sometimes you don't get to have the pure, pristine context, that you actually have to create things of beauty or integrity within the context of a complicated and often broken system. And so I think that the example of at least the moral message that comes through in the art in this particular series is the possibility of doing something of integrity in a complex and broken system. And for most people, that's the case. And to be honest, as someone who works on both sides of the fence, both on the church side and on the public side, that's true even when you work in the church, right? If you're on the inside of the church, you actually begin to see some of the brokenness and some of the corruption, and there are clergy and other people who are doing things they have no business doing. And so you're saying, well, how do I be a person am I complicit in being a part of like organizations that do things that are corrupt? And so I think that regardless of the field that you're in, you're going to run into the reality of human brokenness and have to be a person of integrity in that. Now I want to say a little bit about season 2, because season 2 returns, as you mentioned earlier, it returns at least the main protagonist. Spoiler alert, he lives, that person lives. And there is a kind of a secondary moral question I found really, really interesting. You mentioned it earlier. You've won the game. He has all of the money. And I think and you talked about it in a couple of your pieces, that he wins the game, I think at the end of season 1, beginning of season 2, and he could just get on the plane and go back and find his daughter, who's, I think is in America, who he's estranged from, and just kind of turn his back on the people who are still suffering in the game. Or he can decide to try to end this broken game. And he obviously chooses the latter. And so what that also, to me, got to was this idea that those of us who have succeeded, in some sense, in making lives for ourselves, aren't just allowed to close our hearts to the people who are experiencing ongoing suffering. Now, are there other major themes, or you can say more about that, are there other major themes that you saw in season 2 that are different from season 1?
Yeah, I think so. And they're kind of related to the one that you just mentioned. I felt like season 1 was very much sort of interrogating this vertical relationship between the haves and the have-nots. And so the big bad of season 1 was really these mysterious organizers of the game, sort of oppressing everyone who was the participants. Season 2, one of the reasons why I really liked season 2 is instead of just repeating that same theme, they sort of made it more complex by introducing a rule change where now after every round, the players, they have to vote on whether or not to continue playing. And so you can either vote, let's keep playing, because the more you play, basically money gets added to the pot every time a player gets eliminated. So the farther you get, the more money you win, essentially, because there's fewer surviving players left. However, or you can choose to quit, and then everybody just splits the pot as it currently stands. But it had a majority vote. You can't, say like, well, these people, 5 people decided to leave, so they can leave. Like majority vote, and everybody gets the same fate. And what that ends up doing is it really introduces this question of how are we complicit in this system? Yeah. And it introduces this question of what is our role? What is our agency within this system? That
are we voting for our own oppression?
Exactly. It's so, when I saw season 2, I just got chills about how relatable it was to us as Americans. This is a Korean drama that was written in 2022. I think he started writing it a couple of years ago, but it couldn't have landed at a better time.
Now, on the two sides, and maybe let's get to the Korean versus the American parts of this. On the two sides, those who vote to go or vote to stay, they're given these badges, one red and one blue. I don't know how you can get more heavy-handed, but I didn't even catch it until I read your article. So I will be honest that I did not catch the red and the blue opportunities. So there's two sides, red and blue, who are voting whether or not to continue or to leave the game. And so it seems like, and I think you mentioned in one of your articles, you're talking to the editor, and I'm just reading it here. He says that we get to vote about what happens in our society. What happens if the majority isn't always right? And the idea that just because you vote for something and the majority of people vote for something, it doesn't actually imbue that vote with morality. The morality exists outside of the decisions of the majority. I just thought that was I did not see this. So I'm not saying that once I noticed this in the film, after I read your article, Rebecca, I felt so much smarter because now I can go and talk about the critique of, the idea that a vote decides morality. So I just thought that was really interesting.
That quote was said to me by director Hwang when I went to Korea in November 2023. So it was like, when they were filming, and I just, it was in the transcript. I wrote it down. Okay, fine. But it wasn't until I started writing the story a year later in the context of what we were experiencing here in the US that quote resonated. Hey, when he said it, I was like, oh, is the majority always right? Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
But it really resonated and it raised all those questions exactly like you said. I mean, why are we giving?
Yeah, I think that, and I'm working on a piece about this that may or may not come out, but I think it's really important for sometimes when an election occurs for people to kind of pause and say, well, what led people to vote differently than me? And what what are the excesses on both sides? All of those things are important questions to ask. But an election is it does not make wrong right. It just puts whoever won in power. And so I do think there's this danger, and I kind of see it. I was telling a friend of mine on text, and who will remain nameless, it feels like being black is out of style now. And what I mean by that is like there is a clear vibe that any discussion of race or justice is met with like innate skepticism because of the current political context. Mm-hmm. And the idea that, because this election has happened, therefore like it's proved that like racism isn't real anymore. But the idea that like an election decides right and wrong is just, to me, there's this famous quote in the Bible. It's one of my favorite. All of the Bible is my favorite, so I shouldn't say it's one of my favorites. It's what's coming to me right now. But when Jesus is before Pilate, and Pilate asked Jesus, like, Jesus, I came to bear witness to the truth. And Pilate goes, what is truth? Now, behind that, Pilate's whole point is, I have an army, right? I have the entire weight of the empire. What does truth matter to me? Mm-hmm. I decide what truth is. And the whole point of the resurrection, one of the points of the resurrection, is that truth exists outside of a politician's ability to impose it upon people. So Pilate can give the sentence of death, but God can overwhelm that sentence and raise Jesus from the dead. And so that means that power and truth are forever separated in the Christian context. And so, elections can be disappointing and people can make voting decisions, but that to me doesn't establish right. So you have parts of kind of Korean context. Now I understand like you're not Korean, but are you a Korean drama person? Are you a K-drama? Is that your world at all?
It is my world. I am a lover of Korean drama, and I'm part of, I mean, my husband's Korean American, so my in-laws are all Korean. But I think that, and I'm definitely very much as plugged into Korean pop culture as the average Korean boo.
Are there any elements of like the filming or the plot pacing that someone who's more immersed in kind of the Korean drama world that they might know, that those of us who are just, I mean, I think I've seen, a couple of Korean movies, the ones that really popped. Yeah. But for those, like, is there things that, like someone who's really into the culture might notice these things that those of us who are just tuning in might miss?
So that's a great question. I will say that the Korean dramas that I tend to consume are more
the
romantic kind. So yes, Squid Game is a little departure. My husband now, he would be perfect to answer this. I will say though,
is he floating around? Maybe we'll bring him on the podcast.
I'm going to text him right now.
Text him. I'm
going to text him. I will say though that some of the things that kind of hinted for me were. For example, okay, this is a little spoilery. So there's that game of Russian roulette at the very end.
Oh, yes.
Where the protagonist, Gi-hoon, faces off against the recruiter of the game. And essentially, and I won't go, but essentially they both at different points face death. And and they are, and the other person, the recruiter taunts Gi-hoon, the protagonist, and says like, hey, you don't have to abide by the rules of this game we just made up, because it's your turn to pull the trigger at your head. There's one bullet left in the chamber. Yeah. You can just break the rules of the game and just shoot me and live. But if you do, you have to admit that you're just a piece of trash, like all of these people playing the game. You're just this poor person, this piece of trash. And then he survives, and then the tables are turned. It's now time for the recruiter to pull the trigger at his own head. And for sure, now he's going to die because they played this game of Russian roulette, 6 rounds. There's only 6 chambers, 1 bullet. And now the Gi-hun, the protagonist, says, hey, you don't have to abide by the rules of the game. You can just shoot me, continue to live your nice life. But if you do, you have to admit that you're just a dog for these VIPs. You're just their servant. You obey their will, And I feel like, to me, there is something that feels like maybe in Western or American context, we're like, oh my gosh, like who cares about honor?
Yeah.
Just leave the game.
Yes.
But that sort of thing really is one thing. Okay, are you serious about asking my husband to come on? Because he can answer this question.
Yeah, okay.
He's right here.
Jump in. This is okay then.
This is Mike.
This is Mike. Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Hold on, I'm going to give him the headphones.
Hey, Mike, how's it going? So the question I was asking your wife is, for those of us who don't consume a lot of Korean film, are there elements of Squid Game that we might miss as American consumers that are kind of cultural nuances in the show itself?
That's a great question. So I would say yes. I would say the way that the characters, first of all, the way the characters behave. And so a lot of the cultural norms and nuances of their behavior. So Koreans are very, it's a very collective society, right? And so a lot of the way that the characters respond to other characters' choices, it's a big deal. Yeah. Right? Because it's not like this individualistic thing where, everybody can do what they want, let people be. And so everything seems really heightened. The emotions are like, oh my gosh, you did this. And it creates this whole thing. It's a very tribal consequences.
Now, are there any ways that it was more Americanized between season 1 and season 2 from your perspective?
Which season 2 was more
between season 1 and obviously in season 2, they are now aware that it's a global phenomenon. Are there any ways that you feel like they made more concessions to an international audience than being as distinctively Korean as it was in season 1?
Yeah, that's a great question.
If that is the case, I don't know.
I actually don't. I actually think they were pretty true to Korean culture and society. Yeah, they didn't sell out.
They didn't sell out. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. You all are the first husband and wife couple on the history of the podcast. I'm going to bring you back. I like him. He has a good deep television voice or something. I need to get him off. I need to get him off the podcast before people start thinking that he should take over. But thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks, Esau. Big fan personally.
Thank you. So I want to ask you, we want to close with a couple of things. There's one thing that I couldn't get over, and then we'll ask you a little bit about yourself. Part of me thinks this is a great critique of capitalism, and they ask moral questions. But it would be weird if I didn't say I was also intrigued by the Hunger Games element of it. That part of us are attracted, even as we are like, yes, this is a critique of capitalism. But is there an element of, for all of our high-mindedness, we want to see people just fight it out to the death? Is that something like in us that's driving this as well?
100%. I think that there's, the multi-million people who have watched Squid Game around the world. They're all watching for different reasons, and many of them individually are watching for a myriad of reasons. And I think that's a big reason why this was so successful. I think the fact that the show was so in your face and we call it high concept. In other words, the entertainment value is really high. Even the visuals, a lot of dystopian shows. It's very beautifully shot. They sort of use these childhood games, and the players and the soldiers are all wearing like primary colors. And so there's something that's just very, on a visceral sense, just very entertaining and easily consumed. And so, yes, some people, I think, again, with season 2, I think there were some people, I read the reviews, who were a little disappointed because they just wanted to get right into the games. Like, let's just see some people die, And so, that is a big reason why some people watch it. But I do think that the show it's most rewarding when you're watching it for the things that you're mentioning. But it's all of those things. Maybe not romance though. There's no romance in Squid Game.
No romance. Nobody falls in love.
Yeah.
A dystopian kids game battle to the death probably isn't the best context to find love. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't note that you are actually not at home. You are currently at your grandmother's house?
I'm at my mom's house.
At your mom's house.
Yeah.
And because you were in California and you had to evacuate, how are you doing? How is your home? How are things going in, Rebecca's life?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. Yes, I live in LA, and thankfully, so our apartment is in Westwood, which is just outside of the evacuation zones, so our home east of the 405, we're about 7 miles from the Palisades, which has just been decimated, truly decimated. So, we've been really lucky. We decided to sort of voluntarily come down to Orange County, where my mom lives, mostly for air quality reasons. We have a toddler, and the air is really bad in LA right now. There's various sort of information streams that are sort of warning about the potential long-term effects of breathing the particles in the air and things like that. And so it's just, I think that the general rule of thumb is for people in LA right now, no matter where you are, is probably mask up again. So a little bit like NYC post 9/11. Yeah.
For someone who isn't in LA and who's watching this unfold on the news, and once again, you're not speaking for the entirety of Los Angeles, but what misconception do you think is probably the most prominent for those who are outside of LA?
The most prominent misconception is that it's just a bunch of wealthy people who lost, like one of their homes or something like that. I think that, yes, the Palisades is a fairly affluent area, and there were, and in general, California, this area, the property values are just really high. But I think what's lost in a lot of this is Altadena, which is so there's two major fires burning, one on the west side and one on the east side. The one on the east side, Altadena. So Altadena was considered the first neighborhood in Los Angeles that allowed Black and brown people to build generational wealth because it was never redlined. That's a massive, that's a hugely significant community. And so a lot of folks who lost their homes there were, BIPOC people who were able to be generational homeowners, and now they have to start over. And so, and again, I think that it's times like these that no matter what your net worth is. I mean, I think the idea of losing a home is it's a very psychological trauma that is very real, and it kind of equalizes in a way. So that's one massive misconception, I would say.
We will keep the people in our prayers. I know that we're going to put a link to your 2 articles in the show notes. But where can people find you on social media? I wish we had time. Maybe we'll bring you back on, because I saw the piece that you did for Indigenous people. So we're going to have you back on to catch up on some more of your work. But where can people follow you on social media or to get access to some of your other writings?
Sure, I appreciate that. Yeah, my social media handles on every platform is @the Rebecca Sun. So THE Rebecca Sun, my name. And I'm currently on like Threads, Blue Sky, Instagram, Twitter, the thing that used to be called Twitter. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Take a look at her articles, and please, content warning, not with the kids, but take a look at Squid Game and see if we got it right. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast.
Thank you, Esau.
The Esau Macaulay podcast is a production of Holy Post Media, produced by Mike Stay Low, Stray Low. If you know, now you know. Edited by Seth Gorvette, like a Corvette. Music by Rob Noor. Make sure to follow the show wherever you get your podcast and leave a review so more people can find it. See you next time. I'm out.
I'm penning these letters with prayers they can aid your endeavors. It's clever benevolence, tasted it, wrestle with, still wrestling. Touch my side and it crushed my pride and told me I'm blessed within. Receive a Christian platitude with gratitude, but in the saddest news I live in doesn't add up to the Beatitudes. Catch me in the catacombs, chiefing like they Pat Mahomes, catching bullets, tackle foes, running plays, defending zones. Field got them doing football numbers, only average grown. He was acting grown.